Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of The Daily Friend Show. I am your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mlondi Mdluli. Mlondi, how are you doing?
Good afternoon, Nick. I'm good, and you?
I'm pretty good, all things considered. The imminent catastrophes that seem to be bearing down on us these days. And I'm also joined today by Michael Morris. Michael, you're currently without electricity, but you're still with us here today. Welcome.
Indeed. Thank you. And as you can see, fairly well lit by a nice sunshiny Western Cape day. Managing with the load shedding seems to be going fine.
Excellent. Well, I suppose we should talk about load shedding. I must say, we've talked a lot about load shedding this year, more than I need for a lifetime. But this really caught my eye, and so I thought we needed to put it in the headline of the show today. And this is comments made by Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde. He was speaking in an interview to Bloomberg in Cape Town yesterday, where he was talking about the province's plans to essentially get off the grid from Eskom, or at least reduce their reliance on Eskom as much as possible. And this was all prompted in particular. I mean, I'm sure the government there had plans to do this for a while. They've been talking about getting the Western Cape, or at least the city of Cape Town, load shedding free for a while. That's been a DA talking point. But Winde says that in a private discussion with De Ruyter that he had last year in December, just after De Ruyter had resigned, De Ruyter told him, "There's big trouble ahead, and do what you can," which there's going to sort of be a bit of a theme today of very ominous and little detailed stories. That would have sent a chill down my spine if I had heard that from De Ruyter. A little bit frustrating, maybe, that De Ruyter didn't say more specifically to Winde about why he was very worried about this. But anyway, so Alan Winde says that the Western Cape government plans to add 750 megawatts of supply by 2025. And reach 5,700 megawatts of supply by 2035, which is pretty ambitious stuff. I'm not sure of all the maths of how much the province uses, so I don't know whether that would fully get it off the grid, but that would presumably go quite a long way, especially if to assisting the Western Cape escaping load shedding. Mlondi, let me start with you. Let me ask you, I think, a little bit more of a general question. I don't know, what's your take on this, on what the Premier is saying on the Western Cape's plans to get off, and of what De Ruyter said?
Yes, Nick. So I'll start off with firstly De Ruyter's views, and I just have to say that he should be commended, just for speaking the truth, because he knows that things aren't going well, and also he knows that things aren't going to be sorted out soon. So I guess he should be commended, just for speaking of the truth. And also, with De Ruyter, I think that he's not the best that we've had as the CEO of Eskom, but clearly he's done well. And in some parts he's done well, and in some parts, he hasn't. But I mean, I guess that he's managed to do just fine. So I guess in my rating, I give him a B for that. And yes, so with regards to Winde's views, I guess that he was also must be a committee, for. For.
We're not really seeing other provinces do anything like this, right?
Yes, true, Nick. Because we've seen in other provinces, for example here, in KZN, that they haven't really said anything about about trying to move away from Eskom. Yes. So I guess that the Western Cape is doing well, just for trying to get away from depending on Eskom. Yes.
So Michael, I mean, Eskom's kind of, because you've been living in Cape Town for a while now, so you've actually experienced there has been this difference where the Western Cape, I think, until relatively recently, has been able to escape the high levels of load shedding. Like whenever the rest of the country's on stage 3, Cape Town would be on like stage 2, that kind of thing. I see in the comments, Johan says that the Northern Cape has got something going, but small scale. But we're really seeing, I think, the problems with the ANC's kind of over-centralization ideology, the desire to just control everything from one central point. And that means that, you have the opposition-controlled Western Cape trying to do its own thing to make its own plans for power generation. But as Mlondi said, you go to KZN, it's like, we'll wait for national government. What's your take on this story?
I think one of the useful things about it is potentially that the Western Cape could test on a smaller scale solutions which other provinces could pick up, or the whole country could pick up. So I think, in a sense, although we're obviously confronting a crisis, and the word that comes to mind when I think of what De Ruyter said to Wendy is illusions. I don't think Wendy thought to himself, I wonder what I'm supposed to do with these allusions to a crisis. It was quite obvious, but that's another story. It's potentially positive that we're now having to actually confront the crisis as it occurs. We can't say, well, it's going to happen, or it is now happening. We need now to look at real solutions on the ground. What are we going to do immediately? And I think this is one of the effects potentially is that a province like the Western Cape and a city like Cape Town could begin to try out and assess the applicability of solutions on a greater scale. We test them out, see what the problems are. Is it going to make a significant contribution to have many, many more households providing their own electricity from solar, say, and maybe selling excess back to the city? Is that workable? How is it going to work? And so on. So I think a pretty grim story. I think I agree with Mlondi. I think it's very good that we have this truth telling going on. It's a pity, as you say, Nick, that we don't know a little bit more. Maybe he did share more with Alan Wendy, and Alan Wendy's being circumspect and diplomatic. But yeah, I mean, potentially this could lead to better things, and not just, as I say, not just for the Western Cape, although clearly we would be the initial beneficiaries of any alternative power sourcing.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent the ANC could actually do itself some favors by trying out a little bit of this decentralization in its own provinces. I suspect the mafia networks are so deeply entrenched that you probably wouldn't get too much bang for your buck out of it. But I think it really does speak to the lack of creativity in the sort of ANC space, that they haven't tried anything like this. Said, okay, well, maybe KZN can do something, and maybe Limpopo can do something, and we all have slightly different electricity needs. And the thing is, government has actually sort of admitted, at least officially, that decentralization is the way to go. I mean, that's what the unbundling of Eskom is all about, right? You're supposed to take Eskom apart, and then it doesn't have this big central thing that is really difficult to fix. You can kind of fix each piece individually. And yet, when it actually comes time to implement anything that isn't more centralization, that isn't more direct control from the union buildings, from the Tulu House, from wherever, the brakes are put on and everything moves very, very slowly. According to De Ruyter, and I brought this up a million times now, the paperwork has all been done from Eskom's side of unbundling their entity. Government just doesn't particularly seem interested in it. They haven't issued the licenses. They haven't completed their end of the paperwork. It just sort of sits there. Michael, any final thoughts?
And I think what underlines your argument there is the case with the rail network and the recent offering of concessions on certain key routes. This excessive or the impulse to excessively control the terms under which the private sector can get involved to be a partner. A 2-year concession, for instance, on a key route that requires massive infrastructure development and so on, is just so unattractive to any private entity, that it's just not going to fly. So one does need to, one needs to emphasize this over and over, that it requires, there is going to be an effective partnership or an effective exploitation, actually, of what the private sector can offer. Then it has to be a serious proposition that is going to work for partners that you're looking for. But until that happens, we're going to be
exactly, especially when there's this huge trust deficit in the state. no one trusts it to have your back, and so business is not going to invest any money while that's the case.
No.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic for today. And this is actually an opinion piece by our colleague Marius Ruyter that's appeared in Media 24, News 24's publication today, where he talks about the possibility of an electoral threshold. Before we start this, I just do want to make a correction to something I said yesterday on the show. We were talking about the loss of Tshwane by the DA, and I incorrectly said that it was up to the speaker to determine the election process for the mayor. It's actually in the Municipal Structures Act, and good thanks to a listener for pointing that out. I had forgotten, I had read it long ago, but I'd forgotten that it actually does explicitly say you have to use a secret ballot for mayors and speaker elections. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is something that needs to be changed. But anyway, that being said, Marius argues that, we have this kind of very strange outcome from our lack of an electoral threshold. So an electoral threshold, for those who don't know, is where you need to get a certain percent of the vote in order to get a seat in a legislature. So in some countries, I think Israel, you have to get like 3% of the votes. In Germany, you need to get, I think, 5% of the votes. In Denmark, you need to get 2% of the vote. Sorry, Israel's 3.25% of the vote. And the idea of this is to stop these kind of one-man band, tiny little local interest groups from getting into a legislature from a small group of motivated people who don't necessarily represent anyone at large. They just represent this very specific small group of people, or they get in through luck. I mean, famously, South Africa has this party, the African Independent Congress, which it has long been suspected gets votes because it appears below the ANC on the ballot, has a very similar logo. And if your eyesight isn't good, that great, the ANC looks a little bit like ANC. I mean, you will never know the truth of that allegation, but it's something to think about. Anyway, so, and the reason Marius is bringing this up is, we've seen, particularly in the Gauteng metros, this very bizarre thing happening. The ANC and EFF couldn't get along when it came to deciding who was going to be the mayors of these big metros. So they came up with a little bit of solution. Rather than elect an ANC or an EFF mayor, they would pick some third party who would act as the mayor and basically be the balancing between the two sides. In Johannesburg, we got Tapelo Ahmad from Al Jamaah, who, despite the fact that his party got 0.2% of the vote in Johannesburg, and that his party has, I think, 3 seats in the Johannesburg Council, managed to become the mayor. And now we've just seen in Tshwane, Cope, which also got about 0.2% of the vote, getting handed the mayoral chain, which is not something you can make any sort of argument that the voters as a whole were particularly keen on. Even ANC and EFF voters didn't vote for the ANC to get a Cope mayor. Mlondi, let me start with you. Do you agree with Marius's threshold idea? I think we were talking before the show, and you said that this, yes, but also you sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable with the idea. What do you think?
Yes, Nick. Well, I get where Mark is coming from. Because I mean, I guess it's unfair for for the people of of Johannesburg and Tshwane to be led by someone that they didn't vote for by the majority. So I guess that we do, in some sense, need some sort of a change, in our system of electing. So I guess on that front, yes, but also I feel like part of me just feels like it's illiberal to have like these barriers. But yes, I guess that it's something that can be debated, yeah. So yeah, but I mean, I guess it's wrong for the people of Johannesburg and in Tshwane to be led by someone that they don't vote for in the majority. So I guess so I get where Mark's coming from.
So you say that, and there's definitely been cases where electoral thresholds have been abused. The famous one, and Morris does point this out actually in his article, is Turkey, where the electoral threshold was 10%. And wouldn't you know it, but the Kurdish, the party that represented the minority Kurds, would only get about 8% of the vote every election. Michael, what do you make of this idea? Oh, I think we may have lost Michael. As is pointed out in the comments now, there are parties that are currently very much in favor of an electoral threshold, like the DA, which previously had actually gotten. Michael, are you back with us?
Sure.
No, I think Michael's still. All right. While we get him back, the DA has sort of been recently pushing for the electoral threshold, which is quite interesting, because back in 1994, they suffered from the fact that the party only got 1.27% of the vote. So if the electoral threshold had been 2%, the Democratic Party, or the DA as such, may have completely been eliminated from the electoral system, which would perhaps very massively change the political landscape of the country. Let me see if I can get Michael back. Michael, are you back with us? You're muted, Michael. Okay, no, I think Michael seems to be having a mic connection problem. Michael, are you with us? No, he still seems to be gone. Okay. While we wait for him to get back, I just kind of want to say, I think part of the problem is that we have this disconnection from of our public reps from the people, especially when it comes to the lack of constituencies. And this makes the problem of having these really tiny parties even worse, because you can scrape together a little bit of votes from just here and there, particularly into the national parliament, and get elected. And who do you actually represent? It's very unclear. And we've seen that these little parties often don't have particularly strong sort of ideological stand, right? A lot of them. They kind of flutter from one coalition to the next. And it becomes, it adds definitely to the instability that we're seeing. One of the other suggestions that was made by Morris in this article was that you can have political parties which when they sign a coalition agreement, there's some sort of legal ramifications. So, you can have a document that's publicly available that says we all agree to this, and if anyone breaks it, it can go to court, and that can be the party that is in trouble, that broke the agreement, can be, I don't know, fined or something like that. Mlondi, what do you make of that idea, maybe as a solution to fixing the problem?
Yes. And Nick, I guess that could be a solution here. It sounds very reasonable, and I guess it could be a solution, really. I guess it could be a solution.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on to our next one. And this is another one of these stories that is just so ominous that it sends a shiver down one's spine. I see we have Michael back with us. Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, indeed. I must apologize to viewers for even here in the Western Cape, the load shedding upsets our equilibrium.
Very much so. Did you want to say something on the electoral threshold? We were about to move on.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think I share the concern that one wants to guarantee the widest possible democratic participation, but equally, I think it's not a bad thing for society to consider measures that are going to stop frivolous political activity and anything that detracts from having serious-minded politicians focusing on the problems that voters really want to have dealt with. But aside from that, yeah.
All right, so let's move on to our next story, and this is about the City of Johannesburg. which recently had a change in leadership, as we just mentioned. The ANC, EFL, Al Jamaha, Patriotic Alliance, AIC, and I think there may be one other party involved. I don't know, one of the very small ones. Government came in, and we saw this. I think this was reported in the Sweaten, or it may have been on Times Live. This very short story, which sent a little bit of a chill down my spine. City of Johannesburg suspends senior forensic investigation officials. The City of Johannesburg has placed senior officials from the Group Forensic Investigation Services Department on precautionary suspension pending an investigation. The city said in a statement that allegations of misconduct have been leveled against the officials, including preventing council exercising oversight of law and regulations. And the officials have now been suspended to allow due process without hindrance. So I think you can encounter a scenario whereby you have investigative officials who get over their skis, who go looking for things just for the sake of looking for things. But you know what? In the city of Johannesburg, a city rife from top to bottom with corruption, this does not strike me as something that it doesn't enthuse me. Mlondi, it really seems to me as though the Joburg government moved quite fast on this one.
Yes, yes, Nick, and I do find it surprising because just now like we had a change in government, and it's a bit suspicious. Maybe like are they trying to hide something from us, or maybe because this is quite suspicious, really, if you ask me. But I guess only time will tell. But for me, it just seems very suspicious, for now.
Michael, what do you make of this? I mean, it doesn't fill one with confidence when basically a month after getting in, you immediately move to suspend the senior investigators of corruption.
No, exactly. And I think Mlondi's quite right there to be a little bit worried about what this really means. The other thing that immediately struck me was the kind of the quite kind of bland tone in a way, and the brevity of the news piece. When presumably it was, one hopes it was thought to be so important that we've got to get this out immediately, and that the story will in due course in the next couple of hours be expanded on. But it certainly does call for some very pointed questions to be put, and to all sides. I think I'm pretty sure there's somebody there who has some insight into what's going on here, and it would be very good to have that point of view shared publicly. But yeah, it's an astonishing story, very bland, short little piece, but with implications that could be quite significant. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the next one, and this is a story about mostly, I think, about the SABC, but also just generally about Ramaphosa. So it's been pointed out in the media recently that Ramaphosa seems to be, shall we say, not being as active as he could be. There was a long piece in, I think it was News 24, which talked about how Ramaphosa has taken months, and this is something we were complaining about yesterday, to reshuffle his cabinet. And in fact, still hasn't done it, although there's some expectation that it will happen in the next week, now that David Mabuza has resigned as an MP. He apparently missed the date by which he had to sign the Electoral Amendment Act, not because of any stated objection to the act, but just because he doesn't seem to have gotten around to it. And he also hasn't really taken much of a lead in appointing a board of the SABC. And that's the one that caused a lot of drama in Parliament yesterday, when the CEO of the SABC said that he was uncomfortable being an accounting authority in the absence of a board of directors, and that since the SABC has been without a board in October of 2022, it's been crippled, rendering it dysfunctional. Considering the state's visit of Claudia Motsoeneng, I'm not sure how much more dysfunctional we could get, but anyway, Mlondi, what precisely do you think is going on here?
Yes, Nick. Well, it's clear that that we have a president who's kind of sleeping on the job, really, because he takes months just to make one simple decision and act. So this really isn't surprising, because it's because now it's becoming a total habits. So yes, man. So yes, but it, yes, but yes, but it yes, but it yes, but it doesn't come off right. Hey, because now it seems that we have a president who's not really a leader. He's just there just for the aesthetics and not and he's not just doing his job anymore. I mean, he's not doing his job anymore. So yes, so I guess yes, so I guess that it is kind of worrying. And yes, and also now, yes, and also now, with regards to the SABC, how do we expect a company to be well run without a board?
Right.
So yes, so it's very complicated, hey, and it's
And
yes,
the SABC, the point I just want to make about the SABC is, I think a lot of people in the elite have this desire to kind of write off the SABC. It's dysfunctional, it's rubbish, it produces low quality programming, but it remains by far one of the most consumed producers of media in the country, which has an enormous impact on how people get their news, on the programming people watch, and so it really can't be ignored. Michael, you've been in the media space for a long time. I mean, your thoughts on the role of the SABC, and also Ramaphosa, Mlondi said, not being particularly interested in doing the job.
Yeah, which is worrying, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But first, your point about the role of the public broadcast can be enormously, well, it is enormously powerful, but can be enormously positive too, I think, in, for instance, developing the talents of writers, of actors, of voice artists, of music, and that whole industry. And there is a role, I think. One sees it with the BBC, for instance. One sees it with National Public Radio in America, and lots and lots of people do use it. I think another key aspect of the SABC is its broadcasting in vernacular languages and keeping these languages alive and vivid and relevant and so on, giving people news in the languages of their heart. I think that's not to be overlooked. I think a very important function. But for that to work, and to be trusted and to serve a national interest, the organization does have to function properly. Just while Mlondi was talking, I was looking at two sets of phrasing which were very striking with me. The one in the story about the SABC, it's actually the opening words of the piece. It says, "The governance crisis at the SABC continues to deepen." And you realize you could, put brackets around SABC.
That could be anywhere.
insert as applicable, so and that's very much to do with the political inaction or the haplessness going on, the sort of feckless inactivity going on at the top. And the phrase there that struck me was the caption under the News 24 video of the presidency explaining what was going on. Haste makes waste. Well, it doesn't always. It can do at times, but we do actually need to get cracking with finding solutions and implementing them. And it is worrying that the president is not seeming to be acting with any haste at all. Where that's what we need.
Right, and even if one takes the cynical view of government, that the SABC is a tool for government propaganda and that the ANC doesn't have any desire to actually run the thing well. Not appointing a board is still bad because it means that your propaganda arm is less efficient. So it's just bizarre because it's not to anyone's benefit. It seems that whatever is driving this is probably some kind of complicated internal ANC problem about who's going to be appointed to the board. Maybe it's being held as a chip in reserve to be traded away for something else. I don't know. What can we say? All right. I think that's there's one more story we had here. I'll just end off with it without really going into a discussion of it. But there's a report in Defence Web about the state of the South African Navy. We do have, I think it's 4 frigates and 2 submarines, I think I'm correct in saying. And well, it turns out that only one of the 4 frigates is operational, none of the submarines are operational. And it's not even clear to me from the reporting that any of the ships were operational recently. Apparently, there seems to have been a prioritization of the SAS Mlondi, which is the current ship that is working, to get it ready so that it could partake in the exercise with the Russians and the Chinese on our coast, as well as Armed Forces Day, when it could be part of a sort of a naval parade, something like that. Yes, it really strikes me as somewhat suboptimal to pay for a navy but not have one. But yeah, I think let's leave that discussion for another day. Anyway, thank you for listening. Sorry about the connection issues and all that. I hope it wasn't too disruptive, but we will see you next week on the Daily Friend Show. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Cheers, everyone.